Picture this. Nigel Farage wakes up one morning, checks his phone, and discovers that Reform UK has officially become the largest political party in Britain. He probably spilled his tea in excitement, maybe did a little victory dance, definitely rang up someone to gloat. Because after decades of being called a fringe figure, a protest vote, a political gadfly, his party has now overtaken Labour in membership numbers. And honestly, whether you love him or loathe him, you've got to admit that's one hell of a plus twist in British politics. Welcome back to UK Political Insight, where today we're diving into Nigel Farage's latest declaration that Reform UK has cracked the code and can now win the next general election. Because apparently, the secret wasn't better policies or a compelling vision for Britain's future. It was simply getting more people to pay their membership fees than Labour. Who knew democracy was basically a really aggressive gym membership competition? So let's unpack what Farage is actually claiming here, because this is where things get properly interesting. Reform UK now has 269,000 members and counting. Labour, according to leaked figures from their own headquarters, has slumped below 250,000. That means Reform has overtaken Labour to become, at least in terms of card-carrying members, the biggest political party in the UK. Farage is calling this a huge milestone on their journey to win the next general election and the gravestone of Britain's old two-party system. Now, that's quite the claim, and we need to examine whether having more members actually translates to electoral success. But first, let's appreciate the absolutely brutal schadenfreude Farage must be feeling right now. He spent his entire political career being dismissed by the establishment, mocked by mainstream media, written off as a one-issue politician, and now his party has more members than the governing party of the United Kingdom. That's not just a political achievement, that's the kind of revenge story that makes for excellent television. The really juicy detail here is that Labour has apparently kept its real membership numbers secret, reportedly even hidden from its own National Executive Committee, which is absolutely wild when you think about it. Imagine being on Labour's National Executive and not being allowed to know how many actual members your party has. That's like being a ship's captain, but nobody will tell you how much water is in the hull. You can sense something's wrong, the ship feels like it's listing, but you're operating blind. And now we know why Labour was being so secretive. They've lost 100,000 members since winning the general election last year. 100,000 people who were presumably excited enough for Labour to pay membership fees before the election have now decided it's not worth continuing. That's not just disappointing, that's catastrophic. You're supposed to gain members after winning an election, not hemorrhage them like a punctured water balloon. People should be energized by victory, eager to be part of a governing party. Instead, Labour supporters are running for the exits. The Conservatives, who Farage describes as a hollow shell, are apparently only about half the size of Labour in membership terms, which means they're sitting somewhere around 125,000 members, maybe less. The party that governed Britain for 14 years, that once had hundreds of thousands of loyal members across the country, has been reduced to a rump organization that's smaller than a moderately successful football club's fan base. That's what happens when you preside over chaos, infighting, and multiple leadership changes in quick succession. Farage's central argument is that in the 2024 general election, Reform lacked the forces on the ground to compete against the more established parties. They had ideas, they had momentum, they had media attention, but they didn't have enough activists to knock on doors, deliver leaflets, organize events, and do all the unglamorous grassroots work that actually wins elections. Since the election, however, Reform's membership has rocketed from 61,000 to 268,000. That's an increase of well over 330% in less than a year. Think about that growth rate for a second. They've more than quadrupled their membership in months. That's not normal political party growth, that's exponential explosion. That's what happens when you tap into genuine frustration and anger that the mainstream parties have ignored or dismissed. Whether you agree with Reform's politics or not, you cannot deny they've identified something real in British political sentiment and exploited it brilliantly. Farage claims Reform's network of branch activists are flourishing, which is political speak for we now have people willing to actually do stuff in constituencies across the country. This is crucial because British elections are won on the ground as much as in national media. You need people delivering leaflets through rain and snow, knocking on doors and having conversations, organizing local events, identifying supporters, and making sure they vote. Without that infrastructure, you're just a party existing in the abstract rather than a genuine electoral force. The membership numbers, Farage argues, mean Reform now has the manpower to take on the political establishment and win. And this is where we need to separate hype from reality. Yes, having more members in Labour is symbolically powerful and practically useful, but membership numbers don't directly translate to votes. The Liberal Democrats had nearly 100,000 members at their peak and still got decimated in elections. Membership is a useful indicator of enthusiasm and provides volunteer labor, but it's not the same thing as electoral support. However, Farage isn't just relying on membership numbers for his optimism. He points to Reform leading in more than 175 consecutive national opinion polls with a 10-point lead. 175 consecutive polls. That's not a polling blip. That's not margin of error. That's not one rogue survey. That's a sustained pattern showing Reform ahead of other parties for months on end. If that trend continues until the next election, Labour is in serious trouble. Reform has also been winning actual elections, not just polling well theoretically. They had what Farage describes as an earthquake win in May's English local elections. They've been taking council seats from all the mainstream parties in by-elections around Britain. Just recently, Reform came from nowhere to win a seat from Labour in West Lothian, Scotland. West Lothian, traditionally solid Labour territory, flipped to a party that barely existed in Scotland a few years ago. That's not supposed to happen in safe seats. Farage's claim that no Labour or Tory stronghold is now safe is both bold and potentially accurate. We're living through a period of unprecedented political volatility in Britain. Traditional party loyalty has collapsed. People who voted Labour their entire lives are open to alternatives. Conservative strongholds that never wavered are suddenly in play. The old certainties of British electoral politics have dissolved, and Reform is perfectly positioned to benefit from that chaos. The question everyone should be asking is, why is this happening? Why are hundreds of thousands of people joining Reform? Why are voters who traditionally supported Labour or Conservative now switching allegiance? And the answer is pretty straightforward. The mainstream parties have failed to address the concerns of massive chunks of the British population: immigration, national identity, economic security, cultural change, concern about institutions, frustration with political correctness. These issues matter deeply to millions of voters, but mainstream parties either ignore them or handle them incompetently. Reform doesn't ignore those issues. Whether you think their proposed solutions are good or bad, you cannot say they avoid the topics that voters care about. They talk directly about immigration control. They discuss British identity without apologizing. They challenge institutional narratives. They promise to shake up the system that many voters believe is broken. For people frustrated with Labour and Conservative politicians who seem disconnected from ordinary life, Reform offers something different, something that feels like it might actually listen. Farage claims Reform has become the biggest party by giving British people positive hope that they can change the country for the better. Now, that's his framing, and plenty of people would dispute whether Reform's vision is genuinely positive or hopeful. But what's undeniable is that they're offering change at a time when the status quo feels unbearable to many voters. Labour has been in power for months, and things don't feel better for most people. The Conservatives governed for 14 years and left the country in a mess. Reform can position itself as the alternative that hasn't had a chance yet, that hasn't disappointed people yet, that might actually do things differently. The phrase "fix broken Britain" appears constantly in Reform messaging, and it's politically brilliant because it acknowledges what many people feel, that something is fundamentally wrong with the country and incremental changes aren't enough. Labour and Conservative offer tweaks, adjustments, modest reforms. Reform offers to tear down the system and rebuild it. For voters who believe the system is irredeemably broken, that's an appealing message even if the details are vague. But let's inject some reality into Farage's triumphalism, because winning elections requires more than membership numbers and polling leads. British uses a first-past-the-post electoral system that heavily favors geographically concentrated support over nationally distributed popularity. Reform could win 20 or 25% of the national vote and still get a handful of MPs if their support is spread thinly across constituencies. They need to dominate in specific areas, build overwhelming support in target seats, and create the ground game to convert general popularity into specific victories. The membership surge helps with that challenge, but it's not sufficient on its own. They need those members to be active in the right places, organized effectively, and coordinated strategically. They need to identify winnable seats, pour resources into them, and build local campaigns that resonate with specific communities. They need to professionalize their operation while maintaining their outsider appeal. That's an incredibly difficult balancing act that most insurgent parties fail to achieve. There's also the question of whether Reform's current polling lead will hold until the next election. British voters are notoriously fickle and we're potentially years away from the next general election. A lot can happen in that time. Labour could get their act together and start delivering results that improve people's lives. The Conservatives could complete their rebuilding and present a credible alternative. International events could shift political priorities. Economic conditions could change dramatically. Reform's current popularity isn't guaranteed to last indefinitely. Additionally, Reform faces the challenge of being under intense scrutiny in ways they haven't experienced before. When you're the insurgent outsider, the media and political establishment don't spend much time investigating your candidates, your policies, your internal operations. But as Reform grows stronger and